I'm a firefighter who survived the first 12 hours of the alien invasion, and this is my story. Before I begin, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. It was 6:23 a.m. when it happened. I remember checking my watch as I pulled into Station 12's parking lot in Portland. The morning fog still clung to the pavement, typical for early October in Oregon. I was finishing a 48-hour shift rotation, just 37 minutes to go before I could head home to my wife and daughter. Maybe grab breakfast with them before Amy headed to school. Normal thoughts on what should have been a normal day. I'd spent 11 years with Portland Fire and Rescue. Thought I'd seen the worst humanity could endure. Forest fires that devoured entire communities. Multi-vehicle pileups on the interstate. The apartment complex collapse last year that killed 17 people, including 3 children. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared any of us for what happened that morning. The station was quiet when I walked in. Martinez was checking the engine's equipment, methodically going through his end-of-shift protocols. Chun was in the kitchen brewing coffee, the rich aroma filling the station house. Captain Reeves was in his office finishing paperwork, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "Morning's been quiet," Chun called out, sliding a mug of coffee across the counter to me. Highway Patrol reported some weird lights over Mount Hood around 0400, but nothing since. I took the coffee gratefully. Weird lights. Probably just a meteor, Martinez shrugged, joining us in the kitchen. Dispatch said they got a few calls about it. Nothing to worry about. If only we'd known how wrong he was. The first alarm came at 6:47 a.m. Not the regular bell, but the heavy, persistent drone of the emergency system. The sound we dreaded, the one that meant something big. Captain Reeves burst from his office, already pulling on his turnout gear. "Multiple structure fires reported downtown," he barked, reading from the dispatch screen. "Possible explosion at Pioneer Courthouse Square. All available units responding." We moved with practice precision, the result of countless drills and real emergencies. Within 90 seconds, we were geared up and on the truck. Martinez behind the wheel, Chun and I in the back. Captain Reeves on the radio coordinating with dispatch. "This is Engine 12 responding. What's the situation?" Reeves asked, his voice steady despite the wail of our siren cutting through the morning air. The response from dispatch was anything but reassuring. Multiple incidents reported citywide. Explosion at Courthouse Square confirmed. Reports of unusual aircraft over downtown. Pioneer Tower reporting impact on upper floors. Fire Department Command is establishing a staging area at SW 5th and Morrison. I exchanged glances with Chun. Unusual aircraft? This didn't sound like a standard fire call. As we cleared the station's neighborhood, I got my first glimpse of the downtown skyline. Black smoke billowed from at least 3 skyscrapers. But it was the sky that made my blood run cold. Massive dark objects hovered over the city, their shapes unlike any aircraft I'd ever seen. They weren't planes or helicopters. They were something else entirely. Something wrong. "What the hell are those?" Martinez muttered, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Eyes on the road," Captain Reeves ordered, but I could hear the tension in his voice. "Dispatch, be advised we have visual on unidentified aerial objects over downtown. Request information, over." The radio crackled, but there was no response from dispatch. Just static. Chin pulled out his phone. "No service," he said, showing me the screen. "Internet's down too." The knot in my stomach tightened. In my experience, when communications fail during an emergency, things are about to get much worse. We were 3 blocks from the staging area when we saw them. People running, absolute terror on their faces. A woman with a bloodied business suit sprinted past our truck, not even registering our presence. A man carrying a child stumbled in the street ahead of us, forcing Martinez to swerve. "Slow down," Reeves ordered. "Watch for civilians." That's when the first beam hit. A searing blue-white light shot down from one of the hovering crafts, striking a building 2 blocks east of us. The explosion was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. Not fire, not exactly. The entire structure seemed to crystallize for a split second before shattering like glass, fragments suspended momentarily in the air before crashing down. "Holy shit," Chen whispered beside me. The radio suddenly burst to life, multiple channels overlapping as every emergency service in the city tried to communicate at once. I caught fragments. Direct hit on Station 8. Evacuation route blocked. Unknown hostiles at multiple locations. Captain Reeves made a decision. Martinez, redirect to Portland General. If those are attacks, they'll need emergency medical support. Martinez nodded, turning the truck down a side street. That decision probably saved our lives. Behind us, another beam struck exactly where we would have been, the intersection vanishing in blinding light. The hospital was chaos when we arrived. Ambulances crowded the emergency entrance, medical staff rushing between them. People with injuries I couldn't even comprehend were being brought in. Burns that seemed to crystallize the skin. Wounds that pulsed with an unnatural blue light. We pulled up, and Captain Reeves immediately linked up with the hospital's emergency coordinator. Chan Martinez and I began unloading our medical supplies, preparing to assist however we could. "It's happening everywhere," a paramedic told me as we worked side by side, transferring a semi-conscious man onto a gurney. "Seattle, San Francisco, across the country. They're saying it's global." "They who?" I asked, securing an oxygen mask over the patient's face. "Military," the paramedic replied, his face grim. "Before communications went down. It's not just here. It's everywhere." The hospital's backup generators kicked on as the main power failed. Through the emergency room windows, I watched as sections of the city went dark, block by block. The massive craft continued to hover, occasionally firing those devastating beams. "Sullivan," Captain Reeves called me over to where he stood with the hospital's chief of emergency medicine. "We need to help evacuate the critical patients. They're moving them to the underground parking structure. It's the most protected area." I nodded, focusing on the immediate task. That's how you survive in emergencies. Don't think about the impossible scale of the disaster. Focus on what's in front of you. The next life to save. The next problem to solve. For the next hour, we worked alongside hospital staff, moving patients from the upper floors down to the makeshift shelter in the parking levels. The hospital had switched to emergency protocols, treating only the most critical cases. Everyone else was being stabilized and evacuated. It was during one of these trips, bringing an elderly woman down from the 4th floor, that the hospital took a direct hit. Not from one of those blue beams, but from what I would later learn was the first wave of ground troops. The explosion ripped through the east wing of the building. The concussion knocked me against a wall, the elderly patient still strapped to her gurney. Alarms blared as sprinklers activated. Through smoke and water, I saw them enter. Not human, not even close. They stood nearly 7 feet tall, their bodies encased in some kind of armor that seemed to shift and move like liquid metal. Where their faces should have been, there were only smooth, reflective surfaces that rippled with color. They carried weapons that looked like they'd grown directly from their armor, organic yet mechanical at the same time. I remained perfectly still, one hand on the patient's gurney, the other reaching slowly for the fire axe strapped to my back. The creatures moved with unsettling precision, scanning the room methodically. One of them approached a nurse who had been knocked to the floor. She screamed as it reached for her. I didn't think, just acted. The axe was in my hands before I realized I'd moved, the blade connecting with the creature's arm. It didn't cut through. Instead, the metal seemed to absorb the impact, rippling like water. The creature turned toward me, its faceless head tilting in what might have been curiosity or anger. Its weapon raised, pointing directly at my chest. I closed my eyes, thinking of Amy and Sarah, hoping they were somewhere safe. The shot never came. Instead, the sprinkler system, overtaxed by the damage to the building, burst directly over the creatures. Water cascaded down in torrents, far more pressure than a normal sprinkler. The effect was immediate and shocking. The creatures convulsed, their armor seeming to short-circuit, blue electrical discharges crackling across their bodies. They emitted a high-pitched wail that made my teeth hurt. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I grabbed the gurney and ran, pushing through emergency doors into the stairwell. Behind me, I heard more of those wails, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Someone was fighting back. I got the elderly woman down 3 flights of stairs before meeting up with Martinez and a security guard who were headed up to investigate the explosion. "They're in the building," I gasped, handing the gurney over to Martinez. Some kind of "they're not human." The security guard's radio crackled to life. "All personnel, we have confirmed hostile entities in the East Wing. They appear vulnerable to water. Repeat, they are vulnerable to water. Fire suppression systems are effective. All available security to East Wing." Martinez looked at me. "Water? Seriously?" "I saw it," I confirmed, still trying to process it myself. "The sprinklers hit them, and they just seized up." Martinez grinned, a familiar light entering his eyes. The same look he got whenever we faced down a particularly challenging fire. "Well, water delivery is kind of our specialty, isn't it? We found Captain Reeves in the underground parking structure, coordinating with hospital security and a handful of police officers who had made it to the facility. When we told him what we'd seen, he immediately began formulating a plan. If water affects them, we use that to our advantage," he said, pulling up the hospital's emergency plans on a tablet. "There's a pump room on the 2nd floor that controls the fire suppression system. If we can increase the pressure and manually activate all zones, we might be able to clear the East Wing." It was dangerous, maybe suicidal, but it was a plan. Chun, who had been helping triage patients, joined us. For firefighters against alien invaders. It sounded absurd, yet somehow fitting. This is what we trained for, in a way. Running toward danger when everyone else runs away. We gathered what equipment we could. Our turnout gear would provide some protection. We each had our fire axes, and the security team provided 2 officers with shotguns to accompany us. Captain Reeves outlined our route through the maintenance corridors, avoiding the main hallways where the creatures had been spotted. "Our priority is reaching that pump room," Reeves emphasized. "We're not here to engage. Get in, increase the water pressure, activate the systems, get out." "Understood." We nodded. Simple in theory, probably impossible in practice. But we were going to try. The maintenance corridors were dark, emergency lighting casting everything in an eerie red glow. We moved as quietly as heavy boots and equipment would allow, communicating with hand signals. One of the security officers led the way, shotgun at the ready. We'd made it to the 2nd floor without incident when we heard it. A wet, sliding sound, like something massive dragging itself across the floor. The security officer held up a fist, signaling us to stop. We froze, barely breathing. Around the corner, one of the creatures appeared. It moved differently than the ones I'd seen earlier, almost like it was injured. Its armor seemed less cohesive, parts of it dripping onto the floor, leaving a trail of shimmering metallic residue. The security officer aimed his shotgun. Before he could fire, the creature's head snapped up, that smooth reflective surface focusing on us. It made a sound like metal tearing, raising its weapon. Martinez was faster. He'd brought a portable fire extinguisher, and he unleashed it directly at the creature. The chemical spray hit it full force. The effect was similar to the water, but more dramatic. The creature's armor seemed to freeze, cracks appearing across its surface. It staggered backward, the weapon falling from its grip. "Move," Captain Reeves ordered. We rushed past the creature, which was still trying to move, its armor cracking further with each attempt. The second security officer put it down with 2 shotgun blasts as we passed. The pump room was mercifully empty. Chun, who had specialized in engineering before becoming a firefighter, immediately went to work on the control systems. "I can override the safety protocols," he explained, fingers flying over the controls. "But it'll flood every active zone in the building. Anyone not in a sealed area will get soaked." "That's the idea," Reeves confirmed. "How long?" 2 minutes to reconfigure. Another minute for the pressure to build. "Make it faster," Reeves said, eyeing the door. "They know we're here. He was right. Even as Chun worked, we could hear them coming. Those strange sliding footsteps, growing louder. Martinez and I positioned ourselves by the door, extinguishers ready. The security officers took up positions on either side, weapons aimed. 30 seconds, Chun called out. The door burst open. Not one creature, but three, their weapons already firing. Blue energy bolts that left smoking holes in the concrete walls. One of the security officers went down immediately, his chest a smoldering ruin. Martinez and I emptied our extinguishers at the creatures. It slowed them, but they kept coming. The remaining officer fired his shotgun repeatedly, the blasts deafening in the confined space. 10 seconds. Chun shouted over the chaos. Captain Reeves grabbed a wrench from a nearby tool cabinet and physically attacked one of the main water pipes, creating a spray that hit the nearest creature. It recoiled, armor smoking, but kept advancing. Now, Chun yelled, slamming his hand down on the override button. For a second, nothing happened. Then the entire hospital's fire suppression system activated at once. Not just the sprinklers, but the high-pressure emergency deluge systems meant for catastrophic fires. Water exploded from the ceiling, from wall-mounted nozzles, from every available outlet. The pressure was so intense it knocked us off our feet. The creatures screamed, that same high-pitched wail I'd heard earlier. Their armor seemed to melt away under the torrent, revealing what lay beneath. I caught only glimpses, something pale and segmented, more insect than humanoid, before the creatures collapsed, their bodies convulsing. We didn't wait to see if they would recover. Soaking wet, we grabbed the surviving security officer and made our way back to the stairwell. The entire hospital had become a waterfall, every corridor awash. We passed more creatures, all of them disabled by the deluge, their armor dissolving, bodies twitching. Back in the parking structure, we found a scene of grim determination. Hospital staff had organized the space into treatment zones. Armed police and security personnel had established a perimeter. Someone had wheeled in televisions from the patient lounge, trying to get any information about what was happening. One screen showed aerial footage, obviously from a news helicopter. The city was burning. Those massive ships still hovered overhead, but they seemed to be withdrawing, pulling back to higher altitudes. On the ground, military vehicles were visible, engaging with groups of the alien soldiers. Another screen showed what appeared to be a military press briefing. A grim-faced general was speaking. Worldwide attacks have been met with coordinated resistance. We can confirm that the invaders appear to have a critical vulnerability to water. All citizens are advised to use water as a defensive measure if confronted. Water. Such a simple thing. The substance we firefighters worked with every day had become the planet's most effective weapon. Captain Reeves found the hospital administrator. The building's clear for now, but we've basically turned it into a swimming pool up there. You'll need to keep everyone down here. The administrator nodded, looking shell-shocked but functional. We received word that the military is establishing a secure zone at Portland State University. They're evacuating critical patients there first. What about the rest of the city? I asked. The administrator's face darkened. It's bad. These things hit every major city simultaneously. The initial attack knocked out power, communications, major infrastructure. The military was caught completely off guard. But they're fighting back, Martinez pointed out, gesturing to the TV screens. Yes, the administrator agreed. Once they discovered the water vulnerability, things changed. Fire departments across the country have become frontline defenders. That thought was both terrifying and oddly comforting. This was our job, after all, protecting people, fighting the uncontrollable. We just never imagined the uncontrollable would come from another world. Captain Reeves gathered us together. His face was streaked with soot and water, but his eyes were clear and determined. We need to get back to our truck. The hospital is as secure as it can be, but there are other parts of the city that need us. Communications are still down, Chin pointed out. How do we know where to go? Reeves pointed to a police officer who was organizing an escort for the first wave of patient evacuations. We link up with law enforcement, coordinate with whatever military presence we can find. We do our job. It sounded simple when he put it that way. Of course, nothing about this day would be simple. Our truck was still where we'd left it, miraculously undamaged despite the chaos around it. The streets outside the hospital had become a war zone. Abandoned vehicles blocked intersections. Buildings burned unchecked. And everywhere, evidence of the invaders, strange metallic residue on the pavement, weapons unlike anything I'd ever seen discarded in gutters, and the occasional motionless alien body, usually near a broken water main or fire hydrant. We loaded up, checking our equipment. Most of our water tanks were still full, unused since the morning started. Now they represented our most effective weapon. Sullivan. Captain Reeves called me over as Martinez started the engine. Your family. Where are they? The question hit me like a physical blow. In the chaos, I'd pushed aside the thought of Sarah and Amy, focusing instead on the immediate emergency. Now the fear came rushing back. West Hills, I managed. Sarah would have been getting Amy ready for school when this started. Reeves checked his watch. It was just past 9 a.m. Less than 3 hours since the first attack, though it felt like days had passed. We'll swing by, he said quietly. It's on the way to the university secure zone. I wanted to hug him, to thank him for understanding without me having to ask. Instead, I just nodded, my throat tight. The drive through Portland was like navigating a nightmare. Streets I'd known my entire life were transformed into unrecognizable war zones. We had to detour repeatedly around collapsed buildings, craters from those energy beams, and makeshift barricades erected by survivors. We passed groups of civilians armed with household tools, garden hoses, anything that could deliver water. One group had repurposed a pressure washer, mounting it on the back of a pickup truck like a machine gun. They waved as we passed, firefighters, now recognized as the frontline defense. The radio in our truck picked up scattered transmissions as we drove. Military channels coordinating counterattacks. Emergency services directing survivors to secure zones. The words water cannons repeated over and over as firefighting equipment was repurposed into weapons. As we approached my neighborhood, the knot in my stomach tightened. The West Hills had been spared the worst of the destruction, its tree-lined streets showing less damage than downtown. But smoke rose from several houses, and the signs of panic were everywhere. Doors left open, cars abandoned at odd angles, personal belongings scattered across lawns. There, I pointed, my voice cracking. Third house on the right. Martinez pulled over. The two-story house looked intact, no visible damage. But the front door stood open, swinging slightly in the breeze. Sarah's car was still in the driveway. I'm coming with you, Chun said, grabbing a fire axe and a portable water cannon. Martinez and Captain Reeves nodded, staying with the truck, ready to provide support if needed. We approached cautiously, checking for any signs of the invaders. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, the usual morning sounds replaced by distant explosions and the occasional helicopter passing overhead. Sarah, I called out as we entered. Amy, it's me. No response. The living room was a mess, furniture overturned. Our family photos knocked from the walls. Signs of a hasty departure or a struggle. I couldn't tell which. Chun checked the kitchen while I moved toward the stairs, calling my family's names with increasing desperation. Nothing on the second floor except more disarray, Amy's backpack abandoned on her bed, homework still spread out on her desk. They'd been here when it started, but where were they now? A sound from the backyard made us both freeze. Something metallic scraping against wood. We moved to the bedroom window that overlooked the yard. What I saw made my blood run cold. One of the alien soldiers was there, its armor damaged and smoking, dragging itself toward our small garden shed. And cowering inside that shed, visible through the partially open door, were Sarah and Amy. My wife had positioned herself in front of our daughter, a garden hose in her hands, the nozzle aimed at the approaching alien. But I could see from the lack of water that the pressure was too low to be effective. The neighborhood's water supply must have been compromised. Back door, I whispered to Chun. Quietly, We moved swiftly but silently down the stairs and through the kitchen. The back door opened onto a small patio, giving us a clearer view of the situation. The alien was about 15 feet from the shed, moving slowly but inexorably toward my family. Chun unholstered the water cannon, a high-pressure device designed for situations where standard hoses wouldn't reach. It connected to a backpack reservoir containing about 5 gallons, not much, but hopefully enough. "Cover me," I said, gripping my fire axe. Chun nodded, understanding the plan without needing explanation. I stepped into the yard, making enough noise to draw the creature's attention. It turned, that featureless face swiveling toward me. Inside the shed, I saw Sarah's eyes widen, heard Amy's muffled cry. "Hey," I shouted, advancing on the alien. "Over here." The creature straightened, its damaged armor rippling as it assessed this new threat. It raised its weapon, the end glowing with that same blue energy I'd seen earlier. Chun stepped out from behind me, the water cannon raised. Now, he fired, the high-pressure stream hitting the alien directly in its chest. The reaction was immediate and violent. The creature's armor seemed to dissolve on contact, exposing the pale, segmented body beneath. It let out that distinctive wail, dropping its weapon and clutching at the affected area. I didn't hesitate. Rushing forward, I swung the fire axe with all my strength. This time, without the full armor protection. The blade connected with something solid. The creature collapsed, greenish fluid seeping from a wound. "Sullivan," Chun called out in warning. I looked up to see a second alien emerging from behind our neighbor's fence, weapon already raised. Before I could react, a powerful stream of water hit it from the side. Martinez stood at the edge of the yard, directing the truck's auxiliary hose with expert precision. The creature convulsed under the assault, its armor melting away like sugar in hot coffee. "Sarah, Amy," I sprinted to the shed, gathering them both in my arms. Amy was sobbing, her small body trembling against mine. Sarah's face was streaked with tears, but set in an expression of fierce determination, still clutching the useless garden hose. "You came back," she whispered. "Of course I did," I replied, holding them tighter. "Are you hurt?" "Either of you." They weren't, just terrified and exhausted. Sarah explained how they'd been preparing for the day when the attack began. They'd seen the ships from the bedroom window, watched in horror as the destruction started downtown. When the aliens began moving through the neighborhood, they'd hidden in the shed, using the garden hose to fend off the first few that approached. "The water hurt them," Sarah said. "But then the pressure dropped and we were trapped." "You did exactly right," I told her, my voice thick with pride and relief. "Water is their weakness. You figured it out on your own." "Fire truck," Amy exclaimed, finally noticing the engine at the curb, her fear momentarily overshadowed by the excitement any child feels at seeing such a vehicle. "That's right, sweetheart," I smiled, struggling to keep my voice steady. "And we're going to take you somewhere safe now." Captain Reeves approached, his expression softening at the sight of my family. "We need to move. Militaries established a secure perimeter at the university, like we heard. They're gathering civilians there." Sarah looked at me, understanding in her eyes. She knew what was coming next. "You have to go back out there, don't you?" she asked quietly. I nodded, the familiar guilt of my profession weighing heavily. Even in normal emergencies, there was always that pull, the duty to help others balancing against the desire to protect my own family. "I can get you to the secure zone," I said. "But yes, after that, there are a lot of people who need help." Sarah squared her shoulders, that same determination I'd fallen in love with shining through her fear. "Then we'll help too. I'm a nurse. They'll need medical personnel. And Amy can stay in whatever area they've set up for children." I wanted to argue, to insist they find the safest possible corner of the secure zone and stay there. But Sarah was right. Everyone with skills would be needed in the coming hours and days. We gathered what supplies we could from the house, food, water, medical kit, changes of clothes, and loaded them into the truck. Amy sat on Sarah's lap in the cab, her eyes wide as she watched the devastated city pass by through the windows. The Portland State University campus had been transformed into a military base with remarkable speed. Tanks and armored vehicles surrounded the perimeter. Soldiers with water-modified weapons patrolled alongside police officers and firefighters. The Central Plaza had become a landing zone for helicopters, ferrying in supplies and evacuating the wounded. We checked in at the main gate, our firefighter credentials getting us immediate access. Sarah was quickly directed to a medical triage area being set up in the Student Union building. Amy was reluctant to leave her mother's side, but a kind-faced volunteer explained that they had created a safe space for children in the library, with other kids and activities to keep them occupied. I hugged them both longer and tighter than usual. "I'll be back as soon as I can," I promised. "Stay within the secure zone, no matter what." Sarah kissed me, her lips salty with tears. "Be careful out there." "Daddy," Amy said, her small hand gripping my turnout coat. "Are the aliens going to win?" I knelt down to her level, looking into those trusting eyes. "No, sweetheart. They might have fancy ships and weapons, but they forgot to check one very important thing before attacking our planet." "What's that?" she asked. "Whether they could handle our water." I smiled, tickling her gently. "Pretty silly mistake when you're invading a world that's mostly ocean, don't you think?" That earned me a small giggle, the most beautiful sound in the universe at that moment. Rejoining my crew, I found them conferring with military officers, sharing what we'd learned about the invaders' vulnerability. The military had already adapted, retrofitting water cannons onto vehicles, distributing water weapons to soldiers. Someone had even modified a crop-dusting plane to spray water instead of pesticides, turning it into an anti-alien bomber. "Sullivan, your family good?" Captain Reeves asked as I approached. I nodded. "They're staying here. Sarah's helping in medical." "Good," he replied. "We've got new orders. Military is coordinating with all emergency services. They're establishing defensive perimeters around secure zones in every major city. We're being deployed to help hold the North Campus line." Just like that, we were back in the fight. Our truck, with its water cannons and supply tank, was a more effective weapon than any gun. We took up position along the northern edge of campus, where a makeshift wall of concrete barriers had been erected. Other firefighters joined us, forming a line of trucks and personnel ready to repel any approaching hostiles. The attack came an hour later. Not the ships this time, but ground forces. Dozens of the alien soldiers moving with that unsettling precision toward our position. They fired as they advanced, blue energy bolts striking the barriers, occasionally finding human targets who screamed and fell. But we were ready. At the command to engage, every fire hose, water cannon, and modified sprayer opened up simultaneously. A wall of water met the advancing aliens, catching them in a devastating crossfire. Their armor dissolved, bodies convulsed, and the advance collapsed into chaos. Military units moved forward, using specialized weapons to finish off the vulnerable creatures. It was a decisive victory, but just one small battle in what was clearly becoming a global war. Throughout the afternoon, reports came in from around the world. The same scene playing out in every country on every continent. Firefighters and water delivery systems becoming the front line of humanity's defense. The alien ships began withdrawing as the day progressed, pulling back to higher altitudes, eventually disappearing altogether. By nightfall, the immediate threat to Portland had subsided, though occasional skirmishes with stranded ground forces continued. I found my way back to Sarah and Amy around 8 p.m., exhausted beyond anything I'd ever experienced. The makeshift medical center where Sarah worked was overflowing with injured civilians and military personnel. Amy had fallen asleep in the children's area, surrounded by other exhausted kids whose lives had been upended in a single day. Sarah was tending to a young soldier with burns along his arm when I found her. She looked up, relief washing over her face. We didn't speak, just held each other for a long moment while the chaos continued around us. "They're saying it's the same everywhere," Sarah whispered eventually. "The aliens retreating. The water working." I nodded, too tired to form proper sentences. My body ached from the day's exertions, from the tension of constant vigilance and repeated combat. But we were alive. My family was safe. For now, that was enough. Amy stirred when I lifted her, those sleepy eyes blinking up at me. "Did we win, Daddy?" "Not yet, sweetheart," I said softly. "But we made it through today, and tomorrow will be stronger." As I held my daughter, I gazed out through the windows at the smoke-filled sky above Portland. The alien ships were gone, at least for now. But this wasn't over. They would be back, perhaps with new defenses against our water weapons, with different tactics or technology. But we would be ready too. Humanity, with its back against the wall, had discovered its strength today. We'd learned to fight back against an enemy from beyond the stars. And tomorrow we would build on that knowledge. I thought about the shift change I'd been anticipating this morning, how eager I'd been to go home after 48 hours at the station, how ordinary my concerns had been. Now nothing would ever be ordinary again. The world had changed forever in those first 12 hours. But we had survived them. And in survival, we had found hope.